So we have done our ATP-PC system, and now we're going to move on to our lactic acid system. And so, what is a lactic acid system? It's important to know that it takes up to 2 minutes, okay? So you can exercise for 2 minutes, so up to 2 minutes, without oxygen. And that's a fantastic advantage, because if you think about it, working for 2 minutes without oxygen is quite a long time. So that's another advantage of this system. And it produces 2 ATP. So that's what this system is going to produce. And however, there are byproducts to this system as well. And that's something that we'll touch upon as I explain through it. So, how does the lactic acid system work? So it's a bit differently to the ATP-PC system, because obviously instead of working from 8 to 10 seconds, you're working up to 2 minutes. So, where do we get our energy from? So in the lactic acid system, we get our energy from carbs or carbohydrates, so foods such as pasta and bread. And what happens is, these carbs that you eat, these get broken down into glucose, okay? So that's what we get from carbs. However, if we're not using the glucose, this gets stored as glycogen. And this glycogen, when you're not using it that much, that gets stored in the muscles and the liver too, okay? So what's important to know, that our fuel source for the lactic acid system, it is glucose. And what happens is, to make energy, we need to break this glucose down. We need to use this substance, okay? So we're going to break this down. And this breakdown of glucose, that is called anaerobic glycolysis, okay? That's what the name is, the important name. So anaerobic glycolysis, or just glycolysis, that is the name that we give to the breakdown of glucose. And this breakdown is due to an enzyme, okay? So when we think of enzymes, we think of things being broken down. And this enzyme has a really long word. And this word is phosphofructokinase, okay? This word here is a long word, phosphofructokinase. This is our enzyme that gets broken down. And what happens here? This resynthesizes to ATP, okay? However, there are byproducts. So from this happening, you can imagine if you're working really hard up to 2 minutes, you're going to generate a byproduct. And this is called pyruvic acid, which is also known as pyruvate. And what's important to know about this acid is that it's a very weak, it's a very mild acid as well. And by that, I mean that when you generate pyruvic acid, it's not going to harm you in any way. However, the longer you keep exercising without oxygen, that's going to generate into a different acid. And this acid is called lactic acid, okay? And it's also known as lactate. And this isn't a good acid. It can cause pain, and it can cause fatigue as well. And what's important to know about this lactic acid, it can prohibit enzymes from working. So all these enzymes that I've talked about so far, such as creatine kinase, ATPase, phosphofructokinase, what happens is this lactic acid, that can prohibit from working. So what happens is, if you go over 2 minutes, that's when we're going to go into our aerobic energy system, because We don't want this big lactic acid build-up, so something different happens. And that's what I'll talk about in 1 second. For the recovery of this lactic acid system, it will take around 8 minutes, depending on the intensity and the exercise that's being taken place. So let's say you're working long